Daughter, marry, is that really all you think about?
When you have 5 daughters, Lizzie, tell me what else will occupy your thoughts, and then perhaps you will understand.
The older I get, the more sympathy I have for Mrs. Bennet. Now, before anyone starts drafting strongly worded letters, I'm not here to defend everything she does. I'm not here to justify her behaviour at the Netherfield Ball, and I'm certainly not here to defend her volume levels so much is loud. What I'm here to say is that Mrs. Bennet might be one of the most misunderstood characters in Pride and Prejudice. Because when we're introduced to her, it's very easy to see her through Elizabeth's eyes. She's loud, dramatic, impulsive, and about as subtle as a marching band. She says the wrong thing at the wrong time, she overshares with complete strangers, and she possesses a truly remarkable ability to turn a private thought into a public announcement. And yet, beneath all of that, Mrs. Bennet understands something that many of the other characters either ignore or have the luxury of not thinking about. Her daughters are in trouble. Not immediately, not dramatically. Nobody's about to be thrown into the streets tomorrow morning, but the reality of their situation is not good. The Bennet sisters have no inheritance. Longbourn is entailed away. When Mr. Bennet dies, the estate will not pass to any of his daughters. 5 young women are grown up in a society where financial security is deeply tied to marriage, and Mrs. Bennet is one of the only people in the house who seems to be constantly aware of that fact. For Elizabeth, marriage is largely a question of affection and compatibility. For Mrs. Bennet, marriage is also about survival. And the frustrating thing is that she's not wrong. The problem is that every time she tries to solve the problem, she somehow becomes a part of it. Nowhere is that more obvious than at the Netherfield Ball. I genuinely think that one evening explains exactly why Mr. Darcy becomes convinced that Jane and Bingley should not marry. The tragedy is that Mrs. Bennet walks into the ballroom believing she is helping Jane's future. By the end of the night, she is unintentionally strengthening every concern Darcy already has about the Bennet family. When Mrs. Bennet arrives at Netherfield, she thinks she's winning, and actually, that's not quite right. She thinks the battle is already over. As far as she's concerned, Jane and Bingley are practically engaged. The attraction between them is obvious. They've spent time together. They enjoy each other's company. Mr. Bingley looks at Jane like she's the answer to a question he didn't know he was asking. From Mrs. Bennet's perspective, everything is going according to plan. And honestly, I understand it. Imagine spending years worrying about your daughter's futures. Imagine watching every eligible gentleman through the lens of what they could mean for your family. Then suddenly your eldest daughter, who's beautiful, kind, sensible, and universally beloved, captures the attention of one of the wealthiest bachelors in the county. Of course Mrs. Bennet is excited. Who wouldn't be? The problem is that she mistakes possibility for certainty. She stops speaking about Jane and Bingley as though they might marry. She starts speaking about them as though they have already gotten married. And that distinction matters far more than she realizes. One of my favourite things about the Netherfield Ball is that Mrs. Bennet, Elizabeth, and Mr. Darcy are all attending the same event, but they are experiencing 3 completely different evenings. Mrs. Bennet is celebrating, Elizabeth is managing damage, and Mr. Darcy is observing. Mrs. Bennet spends much of the evening basking in what she believes is impending success. She talks openly about Jane and Bingley's future, she talks about Netherfield, she talks about the marriage as though the paperwork is simply delayed. While Mrs. Bennet hears enthusiasm, Darcy hears indiscretion. While Mrs. Bennet hears maternal pride, Darcy hears a lack of restraint. While Mrs. Bennet thinks she's showing confidence in Jane's future, Darcy sees a family becoming prematurely attached to an outcome that has not yet been secured. And then there's Elizabeth. Poor Elizabeth. Because unlike her mother, Elizabeth can see exactly how all of this is being received. Every time some member of her family does something, Elizabeth visibly shrinks. Every time another detail is shared publicly, she looks like she'd enjoy being swallowed by the floorboards. It's one of the funniest dynamics in the film because Mrs. Bennet is having an absolutely wonderful evening while Elizabeth is slowly leaving her body. And if Mrs. Bennet were the only source of concern, perhaps Mr. Darcy could overlook it. Unfortunately, the rest of the evening seems determined to support his argument. Because once you start paying attention to the ball through Darcy's eyes, it becomes almost painful. Mary performs and keeps performing and then performs some more. Now, I actually feel a bit sorry for Mary because she's genuinely trying her best. Unfortunately, her best is happening in public. The real problem isn't that Mary sings. The problem is that nobody stops her, at least not quickly. Meanwhile, Mrs. Bennet appears delighted. Darcy notices. Then we have Lydia and Kitty, who spend the evening behaving exactly as Lydia and Kitty always have, loudly, enthusiastically, and with the energy of people who have never once considered consequences. Again, Mrs. Bennet sees nothing particularly alarming. Again, Darcy notices. And that's what makes the sequence so important. Darcy isn't judging individual incidents anymore. He's collecting evidence. Everywhere he looks, he sees confirmation of what he already believes. The family lacks decorum. The younger sisters lack discipline. The mother lacks discretion. And because human beings are exceptionally good at finding evidence or opinions they've already formed, every new moment reinforces the last. What makes this so fascinating to me is that Mrs. Bennet never realized this was happening. She doesn't understand that she's being evaluated. In fact, I don't think she spends a single moment thinking about Darcy's opinion, and that's because her focus is somewhere else entirely. Mrs. Bennet is not trying to impress Darcy. She's trying to secure Jane. Those are two very different goals. The irony is that if she were trying to impress Darcy, she probably would behave differently. But she isn't. She's caught up in the relief of believing that one of her daughters has found security. And I think that's the part of Mrs. Bennet that becomes more sympathetic the older I get, because underneath all the comedy is fear. She's looking at 5 daughters and an uncertain future. She's looking at a society at the time that gives women remarkably few options. She's looking at a ticking clock that everyone else in the family seems much more comfortable ignoring. Mrs. Bennet may express those fears badly, she may act on them badly, but the fears themselves are real, very real, and I completely understand her. Now comes the uncomfortable question. Was Darcy wrong? I think the answer is both yes and no. Because Darcy absolutely judges the Bennets too harshly. That much is undeniable. One of the central lessons he learns throughout the story is that he mistakes flaws for character. He sees embarrassing behaviour and assumes it reveals everything about a person. He sees mistakes and assumes they're permanent. That doesn't mean he invented what he saw. Mrs. Bennet really wasn't discreet. Mary really was embarrassing herself. Lydia really was reckless. Those things happened. Mr. Darcy's mistake wasn't seeing the flaws. His mistake was believing the flaws were the whole story. Because what he fails to see that evening is everything else. He doesn't see Mrs. Bennet's fear, he doesn't see her love for her daughters, he doesn't see the years of anxiety sitting beneath all that excitement. He sees the symptoms, but he misses the cause. And in fairness to Darcy, Mrs. Bennet doesn't exactly make the cause easy to see. I think that's why Mrs. Bennet remains such an interesting character. She's neither completely right nor completely wrong. She's not simply comic relief. And she's certainly not the villain of Jane and Bingley's story. She's a mother trying to solve a very real problem and with a very imperfect set of tools. Sometimes these tools work, sometimes these tools make things worse. At the Netherfield Ball, they definitely make things worse. But what's fascinating is that Mrs. Bennet and Darcy are actually motivated by surprisingly similar concerns. Both believe they're protecting someone they care about. Both think they're acting rationally. Both are convinced that they can see the situation clearly, and both are missing important pieces of the picture. Mrs. Bennet sees the practical realities of the world, but not how she's being perceived. Darcy sees how she's being perceived, but not the realities that drive her behaviour. And somewhere between those two perspectives sits the truth, which is probably why I find myself liking Mrs. Bennet more every time I watch this film. She is frustrating, she's embarrassing, she's occasionally impossible, but she's also one of the few people in the story who never stops worrying about her daughters. Unfortunately, she just happens to worry about them loudly enough for Darcy to hear. And that, as it turns out, changes everything.